Welcome again to the Scaling Up Business Podcast. I'm your host and Gazelles coach, Bill Gallagher. I have with me today Kevin Daum, who will be talking about roaring, getting heard in the sales and marketing jungle. Welcome to the podcast. Welcome to the studio, Kevin.
Thanks for having me, Bill.
Nice to see you here. So what are we talking about today? What are the key parts of roar?
Well, the whole idea behind roar is that there's a whole lot of messaging going on out there in the space, and most of it really just falls flat. You know, everybody has their story to tell. Everybody says lots of things, and most people don't care. So with roar, I address two of those issues. The first of which has to do with being able to tell your story in a compelling way. And there's three basic parts to it. The first one, which I think is the most important, is the aspect of empathy. Business is not about empathy, and particularly entrepreneurs. I find part of what makes them successful is they like to talk about themselves. They're evangelists, right? They got a story to tell. They think the entire world needs to go their way. It's their idea. The rest of the world should follow. That's the way that they push things forward. And the important part of roar at the very, very beginning is, hey, you know what? That's great. Those ideas are fantastic, but they're not actually, the world is not about you. And that comes as a surprise to many entrepreneurs. So the premise of roar starts with the aspect of empathy. What is the pain that you're solving? Mm-hmm. And I learned that, interestingly enough, from a Bay Area entrepreneur. You and I met years ago back in the dot-bomb bubble, and we both had startups at the time. And there was a wonderful entrepreneur named Manish Chandra who built Caboodle and sold it. Now just got funding for a company called Poshmark. Mm-hmm. He's facilitating young women to trade their clothes all over the world now. It's quite amazing. But Manish actually taught me this when I had my startup, and he set me up for VCs and said, look, the very first place they want to know is, what is the pain that you're solving? Because if you're not solving some pain, then, nobody's going to buy. Nobody really cares. And I have that conversation all the time. I was just at Inc. doing a conference, and somebody said to me, well, I don't really understand, because, my product isn't necessarily something that transfers, to pain. It's not like somebody's going to live or die on the basis of my product. And in that process, I ask everybody in the room, how many of you have iPhone 6, an iPhone 6S? And the hands, go up, usually 50% of them. Yeah. And I said to them, how did you feel when the iPhone 6S came out and you only had an iPhone 6, or God forbid you had an iPhone 5? And I said, you remember that longing, that anxiety, that feeling? That's pain.
Yeah.
And so it doesn't have to be, like my old business in the mortgage space. I want to build a custom house and I don't know how to finance it. That's pain. Right. It could be whatever that angst is that you have that you need to solve that problem.
Well, I think you're right. So I notice there's really two kinds of companies that come to us for coaching. And I bet it's true for most of the coaches around the world. There are the people for whom they're just sick of being plateaued. They're like, I want to break out. I want to grow. And I would bet for them the pain is seeing friends' companies grow or feeling like they're not going to turn out or something like that, right? Well, and they're the less motivated of the two. Then the other ones they're growing and things are a mess, and they're the more urgent.
Yeah. Well, I think that one of the things I learned from Manish's father-in-law is there's three motivators that people will buy on, three emotional motivators. Right. Logic is one, greed is another, fear is the third. The most powerful one certainly is fear. The weakest one, sadly, is logic. I think we can see that, pretty much by what's happening in the election right now. But it's an interesting place, right? Because you can see that dynamic. How are they selling? Any of the candidates selling? They're selling on fear, because that's a massive
politics
emotional.
Is almost always fear, and not a lot of
because
hope
it's
and
effective.
Aspiration.
Because it's effective.
So empathy is where we begin, and we're looking at getting in the mindset of our customer. And we do the same thing with our coach. You look at the lead of the company. What is driving that person? Where are they afraid to go? That's the softer aspect that's less directly touched by our habits.
And one of the things that's interesting about companies, when we go into these companies and help them identify the pain, part of the problem is the misdirection of where they start. So if we go in to look at the company and say, what is it that your optimal, because you have to start with your optimal customer. Right?
Yeah.
So let's start there.
Right.
Because all of this only works if you're dealing with an optimal customer. Now,
absolutely.
The entrepreneur who sits there and says, well, everyone is my customer, which is an optimistic view.
They wouldn't be working with us.
Good. All right. So when they've figured out that optimal customer, the customer they want, the next mistake that they make is they start to do customer sat surveys. Oh, I want to figure out what's inside the mind of my customer, so I'm going to go to the customers that I have. And the idea of scaling up, the idea of massive growth is not about the customers that you have, it's about the customers that you want. So when you're looking at the pain, if you just go into the customers that you currently have now, most of what that's going to tell you is the people who more easily believed what it was that you were telling them. Mm-hmm. And so you really have to dig out to find that optimal customer that you're looking for and try and figure out what is their pain and what is the pain that they're having that you have yet to address, so that you can actually look at how to communicate that pain to them.
Awesome.
And when we talk about the whole idea of this, by the way, this compelling value proposition that Roar talks about, the idea is to be able to attract customers predisposed to buy and at a premium price. Because ultimately, I think, unless you're Campbell Soup and dealing, P&G dealing with commodity products, or unless you're a simple internet click and buy, most of your clients and most of the companies we see in the Gazelles organization, they are trying to get to that premium level, high profitability, low gross margin, and scalable at that level. So what happens in this piece is that if you are able to communicate that pain on an empathetic basis, that becomes a magnet at the outset. But more importantly, it becomes the identifier that connects emotionally with that customer, that makes them want to continue the conversation. So think about it in terms of if you were out there networking, right? And you go to a networking opportunity, there's 100 people in the room, you have an hour and a half, there's no way you can talk to 100 people in the room. So somebody comes to you and says, and they come to me and say, hey, Kevin, what do you do? I could sit there and start saying, well, I help people with marketing, and immediately they're going to kind of shut down, right? Because we go into the sales mode. Mm-hmm. But if instead what I say is, look, when you've got a company that's hitting about 100 employees, and all of a sudden their communication, they're not saying the same things. They're not saying the right things. There's inconsistencies in the messaging that's on their website versus what their salespeople are saying. Now, if I'm talking to the right customer, they're going to react emotionally to that. I haven't sold them anything. I just started describing a scenario. And if that's their pain, they're going to go, oh my God.
Resonates.
Yeah, oh my God, that's me.
Yeah. When you speak to someone's pain point, whether they've expressed, especially actually if they haven't expressed it, they hear themselves in your words or in your message, and they're suddenly interested.
Exactly. And that's the same way that you want all of your marketing materials to work. When they come to your website, you want them to immediately see that pain.
Yeah.
And it's that sentence that, exactly as I just said it, if that's what's appealing to them, and there's different ways that you can represent that, perhaps in visuals, perhaps in single slogans, but ultimately the first thing you want them to do when they get to that space is go, I'm in the right place. Yeah. This is the pain that I'm feeling.
Yeah. Now, we actually do a bad job of that, I think.
It is much harder than it sounds, and part of it is because we are so used to selling first. And that got us.
Hey, look at me! Look at what I got.
That got from level 1 to level 2 and pulled in the easy stuff. So why don't we just?
So this first part is empathy and speaking to someone's pain, right? Yeah. The second part of the first.
The second part is objectivity, because let's take that networking scenario. So here you are. I've told you, I've got the pain, and you're all ready to go. Now, if I go, I can help you, you're going to recoil and feel like you're being sold again. And so the idea is, hey, you know what? I just gave you the chance to see that I might be smart. Much better, rather than selling you, to actually show you that I have some smarts. So the second piece is the objective solution to the pain, not my solution to the pain necessarily. That's nice if I've done that right. But what is that objective solution? So as I started, right? What's the pain in my world? Company who can't get everybody on the same page with their messaging. It's getting too big. It's not consistent. The solution is, what if there was a simple way to get everyone saying the right things and ultimately get everything saying the same thing?
Of the message.
Yeah. I still haven't told you what I've done. All I've done is said, here's the pain and here's the solution. And if you're connecting emotionally to the pain, now with that solution, you're going to go, well, of course, that's what I want. How do I?
Well, it begins to create
that?
A case for action. I hear they're speaking the pain, which I now connect with, and now there's a possible future that's expressed in the solution. I don't yet know if you can do that or whatever, but I'm interested in, because I see that it doesn't have to suck like it sucks.
Right. And that just, again, becomes an empathetic conversation of, wow, here's a problem. Yeah, I totally get that. Hate when that happens. Here's the solution. Wow, I would really love that. That's really great. Too bad that doesn't exist. Or where do I find one of those? And now they're in. You're 90% of the way to being able to have a comfortable conversation about what the possibilities are that you can bring to the table.
Nice.
And that really leads to the third piece of Roar, of at least the value proposition piece, which is the hardest, quite honestly, and the most frustrating for many companies, and that's differentiation. And I define differentiation as what your competitors won't do or can't do without great effort or expense. Now, that is not the way that a lot of companies define differentiation, and that's part of the problem. One of the conversations that I have when we teach this is I'll ask people in the audience, how many of you, believe that your differentiation is your customer service? And I get a lot of hands raised, and then I get a lot of people who lie. Because I've seen their websites. And the problem with customer service as a differentiation is that there are very large corporate institutions that actually go out there and say, we give great customer service, and I think people know that they don't. And
oh, no, you can tell. The moment you call into a bigger company and it says, because your call matters, blah, blah, blah. Like, if my call mattered, you'd effing staff the call center and answer my phone.
Right. And it's not that they're not doing the best they can. It's just it gets harder. But the challenge,
in many cases, they're actively discouraging you from calling in. They're making it difficult because they don't want to.
Right. But the real challenge for even any company that goes out there and says, we give great customer service, that's our differentiator, is none of their competitors are out there saying, we give crappy customer service.
Right.
So it's not really, again, it's not a differentiator. It's not something your competitors won't do or can't do without great effort or expense. And by the way, in most businesses today, you're stealing customers. There aren't a lot of new customers for whatever it is that you're doing. Most of the time, you're stealing them from some other company or some other process. And for the most part, it's really hard for them to even articulate that they're getting really bad customer service. They don't understand that they're in trauma until it gets so bad that they're ready to leave. And that's really a small amount of the customers that you're trying to bring over. So there is a challenge. Now, there's exceptions to this. I have seen companies who legitimately have shown some way, they found some tangible way to show they do it differently. The two that most talk about are Nordstrom, of course, which you know well, and Zappos. But what do they have to do to show that they take customer service to another level? It's only the stories and culture that they have of accepting things that don't belong to them as returns, or the great Zappos story about somebody ordered a pizza for them. But not every company can live up to that. And the other one, it's just like
But
this.
of course you could differentiate other than service, right?
Well, that's the point. So that's one that you don't want to hit. The other one you don't want to hit is the whole experience thing, right? Adding up all of your executives' number of years so that you have 2,352 years of experience.
Yeah.
None of your competitors are out there saying, we don't have any idea what we're doing. So those two you have to push aside. And then you have to look for real differentiators. In my own case, I use the example that I'm an ink writer. And there are not a lot of marketers that are ink writers. There are some. Right. Another differentiator is I have a degree in media management. The third differentiator is I also have a degree in theater. The combination of those together, and by the way, the third one's really interesting because people go, well, so why do I care? But that opens the door to a conversation on what it is that I'm doing differently. How do I use that degree in theater in my communications that makes it effective and impactful?
I think I do the same kind of thing. So there's 180 coaches roughly now in our group, and some of us cross over in each other's geographical areas. And what is it that makes you different? Well, I'm way more irreverent than quite a few of the other coaches, and an engagement with me is has a whole different feel then. So that's one of a couple of differentiators.
Right.
And I think that people often pick that. I'm like, you got to think about it. Like, is that other coach that, what's the stuff? You're going to spend a lot of time with them. You're going to trust your leadership team with them. Some people are very dry and matter of fact, and serious. And for me, I'm like, serious is, well, it's all serious, right? It's like serious stakes. But if you make it serious, it's no fun for me.
There are some coaches, as a perfect example, that what works for them is they're very comfortable in helping you be a little better rather than taking the entire regimen of scaling up to heart. And there are some companies that, for whatever reasons, whatever their motivations or whatever their structures, can't all of a sudden adapt the process. Yep. If you're a coach that fits very well to that, that's a great thing to be able to say. If you're a coach that says, hey, I only am, you can only work with me if you're going to go for the A, you're going to do everything, knock off that list in that time frame. That's an important differentiator within that coach world.
Well, and I think figuring that out is key. There are people who start from a financial background. Mm-hmm. Oh, I'm not that one. It's in our name.
Exactly.
We start with the people side of things.
Exactly. Yeah. And again, the key about it is that some of the differentiators for a company, some of those differentiators you already have. Right. Some of those differentiators you need to discover and you need to figure out. Yes. Some of those differentiators may not be differentiators at all, or they may not be
in the minds of your customer.
Right, they may not be critical to the customer. Yeah. And then the other thing is that some of those differentiators may be differentiators that you should be working on. They should be key components that you've stuck into the 3-year thrusts that you've said, look, we intend to be here in 3 years and we're going to put our energy and our resources into having that differentiator 3 years from now. The benefit of being is that you'll be under the radar to your competitors for that period of time, and they'll wake up one day and all of a sudden you've got this differentiator that's blowing them out of the market. And again, go back to that point, what they won't do or can't do without great effort or expense. By the time they sense that you've developed this key differentiator, they're going to be sitting there and going, I don't understand how we would do it. It'd take us 3 years and a lot of money and resources to do that. And that's great. That's the idea. So many people ask me, they go, Kevin, what kind of differentiator could we do that would help us kill the market in 90 days? And the answer is there isn't one, because anything that you would do in 90 days, your competitor's going to follow on very quickly and take.
Well, I think this also goes along to a recent podcast we had. We had Dave Rendell on talking Freak Factor and how to discover what makes you unique and different. And
Take
I think
forever
it's
to look that good in pink.
For those of you who don't know Dave, he wears a lot of pink and he's freakishly tall.
Yes, he is. That's a differentiator that I will never be able to compete
He's also
with.
very funny. Yeah. Awesome. Okay. And then there's different types of people?
Yeah. So once you get this message straight, and by the way, that concept of what's the empathetic pain statement, what is the objective solution, and then what are your key 3 differentiators, a couple things to know about that. First of all, it makes for a great elevator pitch. You don't need to know any more. Now, I live in New York where you have a lot longer for an elevator pitch because there's 100 floors or so. Right. But really, that's the piece that you're looking for. And it's most important to know that if you put out that pain statement and the customer's not responding.
Well, that's very resonant then also with cynics. Start with why. That pain statement speaks to the why and the motivation. The second piece is your how and your what as well.
And the whole idea of compelling messaging and marketing in general is about efficiency. It's about that networking room of 100 people. If you're going out and you're using that pain statement and somebody doesn't respond to it in a way that is positive to you, you just got to look at them and say, hey, move on.
Yeah.
And that's how you're going to get through the 100 people in the room and find the people that resonate. Companies have their salespeople spending lots and lots of time trying to convince people who don't even relate to the pain.
Yeah.
And so as much as this is an outward going process, it's actually a diagnostic to see if you're spending time on real customers or not.
Okay.
Now what happens is you move to the second part of Roar, which is not everybody responds to that buying structure in the same way. And so Roar actually helps you to work with those customers or those prospects in a way that will move them down the line. So Roar stands for R, recognize the type of buyer that you're dealing with.
Right.
O, which is observe it from their perspective. So again, with that empathy piece. The third part, A, is acknowledge. You have to actually tell them, hey, I get you.
Yeah.
And then the last, which is to resolve their need in some manner.
Yeah.
And the good news is there's not a zillion types of buyers.
Yeah.
I figured out that there's actually 4. There's a process that has been used for 3,500 years to teach children a compelling story and sell them on the process of this story. And it comes actually from the Old Testament. I happen to be Jewish. At the Passover Seder, I know, and that's more obvious to some people than others. But you put the New York thing in the exactly. So in the Passover Seder, which is where Jews for thousands of years have been selling the story of Exodus, the story of the Bible, to their kids. There's a passage that talks about the 4 kinds of children that you have to teach. The wise child. Yeah. So in the passage, it's the wise, the wicked, the simple, and the child unable to ask.
Yeah.
Now we looked at that, and it turns out it's the same kinds of buyers, slightly adjusted. So there's a wise buyer, there's a cynical buyer, hence the wicked. There's a simple buyer, and then the last one is the buyer unable to ask, or what I would call the disinterested buyer. Now, there's an important differentiation between the disinterested buyer and people who are not your buyers at all. And a lot of companies spend a lot of time working on people who are not their buyers at all and thinking that they're just disinterested. And that's where you want to really look at the efficiency process more than anything else, which is a lot of the content marketing, HubSpot content marketing, the things that I talk about in video marketing for dummies. All of that is attention-getting work to not turn everybody into your buyers, but to pull out those people who are actually really good prospects and attract them to your process, attract them to your message. And so that disinterested buyer will convert into the wise, the simple, or the cynical at some point. So
you're nurturing that kid. Well, I'm often surprised that I hear somebody is like, reaches out to engage us, and they're like, oh, we came to a workshop you led 2 years ago, and thought it was awesome. We've been thinking about it. I'm like, why didn't you ever speak up?
And there could be
percolating.
There could be 1,000 reasons that are factors. The funny thing is so many of us were so sold in our minds, we just don't understand why other people just don't follow our sales process without consideration for whatever else is happening in their company. And, I think one of the
priorities in there.
I think one of the benefits I have of there's not a lot of benefits to getting old, but one of the ones that's there is you start to see long-term patterns and anomalies. And in our minds, the sales cycle for, when you look at closing a client in Gazelles, we probably look to the most optimal situation, which is the person who hears us or meets us or comes to the seminar and immediately turns over and buys. And that, in our mind, is the way it should always work. But in reality, once you've done it for a while, there are people that you've spoken to 2-3 years ago.
3 or 4 months, and then a few that show up much later, and maybe one that,
And in likelihood, those people
But that's true of our clients as well, right?
Exactly.
We're not just talking to coaches here. We realize all of our listeners have different kinds of businesses, and all of that's true for them too.
The sales process has variables in the time frame and the requirements of what it takes to actually convert a client. And that's partly where you come into these 3 kinds of buyers.
So it seems like the wise buyer's the more easy, obvious sale, right?
Not necessarily, actually. So let's go through the 3.
Okay.
The wise buyer is first thing I want to say is that people will ask me all the time, am I a wise buyer? Am I a cynical buyer?
Right.
It's situational.
Yeah, got it.
So
totally.
A wise buyer is motivated by the fact that it's probably a high stakes purchase and they're super interested in understanding every aspect of what's going on.
Right.
And so you recognize these people, they just have question after
Due
question.
diligence, thoughtful, careful.
One answer, will stimulate 5 other questions.
Yes.
And they may or may not be that thoughtful and careful in everything else they do, but because they are tied to this particular purchase, whether it's because of the price that they're paying for it or the time commitment that they're making or the stakes that are around with it, because of that, they're going to be highly inquisitive.
Okay.
And so you recognize them at that level.
Yeah.
You look at that. The key component in the empathy aspect is they are not looking for necessarily the answers to every question. What they're seeking is understanding. And so you acknowledge that and you say, look, I get that. There's a lack of comfort in this area, and so so the resolution for them is not to answer every question because maybe the questions are unanswerable.
Yeah.
So what you're trying to do instead is be their guide. Say, look, I don't know that we can answer every question, but I'm going to work along the way with you to actually answer every question I can.
Yeah.
The cynical buyer, which is my favorite.
You love that one. Yeah.
I do because
it seems a key opportunity for the empathy to come in.
It does. They are the most loyal. Now, the whole thing about cynical buyers is the reason they're cynical is because they got screwed in this sort of transaction sometime before, so they're walking in.
There's a fear at work
of some kind, and they're going to recognize. You're going to recognize them by knowing they're probably asking a lot of questions similar to the wise buyer, but the questions are highly pointed.
Yeah,
they're pointed towards a particular area.
Yeah. And I think you can hear the cynicism too, right? There's a charge, there's a tone that's often apparent with people.
Some of that's regional. The Bay Area is known for its quiet politeness, so you might not hear that in the same way. In the South, it's known for, hiding everything behind the curtain. So
they smile and say, bless your heart.
Exactly. So you may not be able to pick it up in that way, but you can see them if they're stuck on a particular area.
Yeah.
And so once you've recognized that, again, you have to understand they're afraid, just like you said, of being screwed. You want to go in and acknowledge and say, hey, I understand that you got messed up by something else in this environment.
Right.
So the 2 keys to resolving them is first, you have to open the kimono. Show them how the inside works. Back in my mortgage days, that was where we would pull out the wholesale rate sheet and say, let me show you exactly what I'm making. Let me show you how it works inside the bank so that you understand it. And then you have to sacrifice in some manner. Yeah. You have to give them something that they wouldn't ordinarily get somewhere else. Now, the great part is, if they buy in, these are your most loyal clients, and these are your biggest referrers. All of a sudden,
they're the converted cynic, just like a converted complaint customer becomes your most passionate advocate.
Exactly. Yeah. And they're never going anywhere else, because if they feel like if they go somewhere else, they're going to get screwed again. They don't want to go through that process.
Yeah,
so they're just coming back.
Yeah.
The last one, being the simple buyer, is what most of us are for 95% of what we buy. We go into the market, we want to buy a can of soup. We don't need to be the wise buyer. We don't need to be the cynical buyer, unless we don't know that brand or what we wanted wasn't there.
Yeah.
And maybe we're cynical because maybe we had a bad experience with that. But in most cases, we're just buying what we buy. Now,
accepting, easy. Yeah.
Yeah, except that it's not always so easy. And this is where companies waste so much of their time, because simple buyers want what they want. It might be that they want an Aeron chair and they want it in blue, or they want it at a specific price, or they just want to get a deal, or they just want it, whatever it is that they want. And I will watch sales organizations and sales coaches who will sit there and say, here's how you convert them. And what a massive waste of time to get an unhappy customer, because what they really just wanted was something else. So the best efficiency is to say, look, I don't have if you don't have what they want, right? If you have it, give it to them and you're done. If you don't have it, say, I've got a couple other options for you. And if they don't respond well, get rid of them. Your website can actually be structured. We used to do this, where you structure it to push away those people that didn't want what they want.
I have a good example of this. So I started a few years ago doing CEO coaching, and I thought I was just going to do CEO coaching. And then after a while, I realized that, for me anyway, that sucked and was hard work and not a good client base. And when I shifted to teams, things got a lot better. But then a couple of weeks ago, I got a call from a guy who's like, hey, I heard you're a great CEO coach, and I really need to hire a coach, and I've got a fast-growing company. And I'm like, yeah, I don't do that anymore. I do it as a complement to team coaching if you're buying into the whole thing. But if you're not going to let me in with your team, we're not doing it.
Right. And what a great way then to put on your website, hey, we only work with teams,
right.
so that you could spend time converting CEOs on why they should do it. Let the website do that work with its educational factor, but basically say, hey, unless you want to work with teams, we're not the company for you. And then, because that call was expensive for you, your time is valuable. And you want to spend that time talking to the prospects that you're going to attract, predisposed to buy, and at a premium price.
Yep. Awesome. Well, that's so that there's 4 buyers. There's 3 parts to the honing the message and all of that. That's a pretty great framework, and I love that somehow we managed to work in the 4 questions and the 4 kinds of children from the Seder that we all just had recently.
When something works for 3,500 years, you got to give it a little credit.
Give it a little credit. Well, it's interesting how across cultures and religions there are common stories and things like that, and I'm sure if we had different background, we might find different stories in some Sanskrit tradition or some other thing, right? But we grew up with Seders.
I think the key aspect is to look at what are the messages that have been able to resonate for so long, and look at why it is that they've been able to resonate so long.
Right. So there's something in them, something behind them.
Right. Going back even to the political climate and looking at what is the stuff that is breaking through the media, what is the stuff that is resonating in people's brains, and what is it? It's easy to scoff at the good or the bad of this candidate or that candidate, but for all of us in business, regardless of what happens, this is a fabulous insight time to look at what works in messaging, why does it work, how can it be applied in business in such a way that we can replicate that to find the customers that we want and get them to the door.
All right. Well, this is a super actionable call. We're about time here for our show, but we'll have a recap of the points in the show notes. So the main points will be called out, and then we'll put some links in both to the book and to you and your website. Anything
they
else
can actually download the first 2 chapters that deal with the value proposition. If they go to kevindaum.com, it's right there on the front page. They can download it, look at that value proposition, and play around with it.
All right. So we'll have a link to the download, link to kevinlowe.com. And link to the book on Amazon. It's awesome. You're headed out to a beautiful day here in the Bay Area today. Yeah,
nice day. Nice day for wine tasting. Yeah.
Nice. All right. Well, thanks for coming in and recording the show with us today. And we'll see you soon.
Thanks, Bill.